Let's continue. Chapter 34 begins with a billete, or letter, written by Camila to Anselmo, in which we again note military rhetoric. Just as it is said that an army cannot be without its general, nor a castle without its castellan, I say that a young married woman is even worse off absent her husband. In other words, Lothario has begun to work seriously. Camila says she wants to go to her parents' home, but Anselmo forbids it, leaving her confused. By remaining, she puts her chastity in danger, but by departing, she went against her husband's command. Eventually, Camila's firmness began to tremble, and the words and tears of Lothario awakened in her some loving compassion. The military rhetoric continues. Lothario decides to tighten the siege of that fortress, and as the narrator reports, there is nothing that more surely conquers and lays low the towers and battlements of the vanity of a beautiful woman than her own vanity, fanned by phrases of flattery. Finally, a resounding chiasmus, a poetic figure in the form of a syntactical X, underscores the inevitable conclusion. Camila surrendered, surrender did Camila. Here the moralizing narrative voice intervenes again, long before the story ends. A clear example disclosing that love's passion can only be vanquished by flight, and that no one should attempt to struggle against so powerful an enemy, because divine legions are required to vanquish its human ones. When Anselmo asks for another report, the story takes a Baroque turn. Lothario uses the essence of his previous account, which was once true, to now deceive Anselmo. You have a woman who can, without a doubt, serve as the crown example of all good women. The words that I have spoken to her are simply gone with the wind. At the same time, and in a curious way, the military rhetoric becomes decidedly maritime. You have passed dry through the sea of doubts and suspicions which women can and do produce. Do not attempt to sail forth again into that oceanic abyss of new perils, and dare not to test with another pilot the grace and fortitude of the ship that heaven has bestowed upon you. So Anselmo wants to end the game. To do so, he asks Lothario to pretend to be in love with a young Florentine woman and to write her verses. This woman does not exist, but for her to be credible to Camila, Anselmo invents a pseudonym, Clori. Lothario tells Camila that his verses are actually meant to praise her alone, because according to the narrator, had she not been warned, she would have doubtlessly fallen into the desperate web of jealousy. The sonnet is marvelous, like that perfect ballad we expect from great rock bands. Paradoxically, given the current narrative chaos, this is the easiest sonnet to understand in the entire novel. Each stanza represents one of the four main points that the sun occupies in the sky during a 24-hour period: the zenith, the nadir, and each of the horizons. At each point, the poet complains of his unrequited love for Clori. Interestingly, the only cardinal direction mentioned is east, the Orient. Notice also the typical play Cervantes makes with the commercial, religious, and narrative meanings of the words cuenta and cuento, or accounting and account. The poet offers heaven a poor accounting of my wealth of sorrows, and towards the end he says, I double my cries, night returns, I repeat my sad account. What is perhaps most interesting about this scene is the secret flirting with Lothario that Camila performs right in front of Anselmo. Is everything that poet lovers say true? Lothario replies, as poets, no. But as lovers, they're always as truthful as they are speechless. Camila requests another sonnet, which returns to the maritime theme, lamenting the misfortune of a poet-lover as if he were a lost sailor. Woe to him who sets sail under dark skies, crossing seas uncharted. hazardous routes where neither port nor north can ever be found. Meanwhile, the narrator emphasizes again the ironic dynamics of the love triangle. Anselmo praised this second sonnet as he had the first, and in this way he went adding link by link to the chain which he drew forth to fashion his own disgrace, because the more Lothario dishonored him, the more he told him that he was most honored. And thus all the steps that Camila descended toward absolute disgrace, in the opinion of her husband, she climbed toward the summit of virtue and excellent reputation. At this point in the plot, we meet Leonela, the maid to whom Camila confesses everything. Let's first consider the rhetoric whereby Camila represents her dilemma as a matter of values and estimations. I am ashamed, Leonela, my friend, at having so lowered my self-esteem, because I didn't even make Lothario suffer time before taking complete possession of my will, which I so quickly surrendered. Leonela supports her mistress, telling her that love is mutable and impossible to control, adding that someday I'll tell you everything, my lady, for I too am made of the flesh and blood of a girl. She assures her that Lothario esteems you as much as you esteem him, and then lists a complete and entire alphabet of praise for Lothario, calling him appreciative, benevolent, courteous, etc. Note that according to Leonela, the X does not fit him because it's a harsh letter. All this reassures Camila, that is, until Leonela informs her that she too is involved in a love affair with a well-born young man from the same city, at which point Camila became disturbed, fearing that door might lead to her dishonor. The problem is that because Camila has confessed everything to her maid, she cannot control her. As the narrator points out, this is among the many harms brought about by the sins of ladies. They become the slaves of their own servants. With these mutual confessions, the main crisis arises. Leonela lets her lover visit her in a room of Anselmo's house, and Camila has to facilitate these unions. She removed all hindrances so that he would not be seen by her husband. Ironically, the crisis is instigated by Lothario. Cervantes' description of the psychopathology of jealousy is another marvel. It turns out that Camila could not remove the obstacles of Leonela's lover so perfectly that Lothario did not see him one day departing at the break of dawn. Without knowing who he was, at first he thought it must be a ghost. But when he saw him walk, muffle his face, and gather his coat about him with deliberate care, he dropped his first impression and hit upon another, which would have been the ruin of them all if Camila had not remedied the situation. Lothario thought that this man, whom he had seen leaving Anselmo's house at such an odd hour, had not been there for Leonela. He couldn't even remember if Leonela existed. His only thought was that Camila, who had been so easy and loose with him, was being just as easy and loose with another. Lothario becomes blind with jealous rage and prepares his revenge, informing Anselmo that Camila had finally succumbed to his advances and that they had arranged to meet the next time Anselmo was absent. Lothario tells Anselmo to pretend to leave for a few days and then hide behind some tapestries in a room where the lovers meet. Remember how Cardenio hid at Lucinda and Fernando's wedding? But soon thereafter, Camila confesses to Lothario the troubles that she is having with Leonela. At first, Lothario believes she is lying. When she cries, however, he is convinced she is telling the truth. So he confesses that, instigated by the furious rage of jealousy, he has told Anselmo about them, begging her for advice on how to safely escape from such a twisted labyrinth. Speaking of labyrinths, let's see. Don Fernando's tears before Dorotea proved false, but St. Peter's were real. Are Camila's real? It's hard to tell, right?